My father had a saying he repeated so often it stopped meaning anything. Every building starts with the foundation. He had it engraved on a brass plaque in the lobby of Voss Construction's Houston headquarters, right underneath a framed photo of himself shaking hands with the mayor. He said it at investor dinners, he said it at charity galas, he said it to journalists who came to profile him for Texas Monthly and Forbes, and once, memorably, for a feature in Architectural Digest about the new luxury high-rise he'd built on the Buffalo Bayou. He said it so many times that I, his only son, had learned to tune it out completely, the way you tune out background music in a restaurant, the way you stop hearing the hum of the air conditioning. He gave me a tape measure when I was 8 years old, brass-edged, the kind that snaps back hard enough to cut your finger if you're not careful. On the back, in his handwriting, he'd had it engraved, "Build something real." I carried it for years in my jacket pocket, jangling against my keys, and I never once thought about what it meant. It was just a thing, an object, weight without meaning. I know exactly what it means now. But that understanding cost more than I can put into numbers. And it started on a Tuesday night in October, 3 months before my 27th birthday, when I drove my Porsche 911 through a red light at 62 miles per hour and hit a man's truck hard enough to crumple both doors on the driver's side. I was drunk. Not fall down, slurring, sloppy drunk. The kind of drunk that feels like confidence. The kind that makes you think you're sharper than you are. That makes the yellow light ahead look very much like a green one. I was coming from a rooftop bar in Midtown, where I'd had 4 whiskey sours and a glass of someone else's champagne. And I was heading nowhere in particular, because I never had anywhere particular to be. That was the thing about being Harlan Voss's son. You never needed a destination. The money provided them for you. And when it didn't, you found a bar. And when the bar closed, you found another one. The crash was loud and then very quiet. My airbag deployed. I remember the smell of it, chemical, burning, like something synthetic catching fire. I remember the spiderweb pattern of the other car's windshield in the streetlight. I remember sitting in my driver's seat for what was probably 10 seconds, touching my own face to confirm I was still there, and then getting out to look at what I'd done. The truck was a 2009 Ford F250. It had a dent in the driver's door that I learned later required full panel replacement. The man inside was named Joseph Kowalski, and he was 52 years old, and he'd been driving home from a double shift, hauling equipment for a pipeline job near Pasadena. He was conscious. His left arm was braced against the door in a way that made me feel sick when I understood why. He looked at me through the shattered window, and what I remember most is that he didn't yell. He just looked at me with this expression, tired, unsurprised, like this was simply one more thing that was happening to him in a life that had contained many such things. I took out my wallet. I don't know why that was my first instinct. I've thought about it 100 times since, and the only honest answer I can give is that money was the only language I knew. Problems were solved with money. Consequences were erased with money. My father had taught me that. Not in words, but in action, in the dozen times he'd made something go away with a phone call and a check. I pulled out $600 in cash, which was what I happened to have, and I held it out through the broken window. He looked at the money. He looked at me, quietly, with a kind of exhausted dignity. "Put that away, son." I didn't put it away. I set it on his dashboard because I didn't know what else to do. And then I stepped back and called my father. Harlan Voss arrived in 35 minutes in his black Escalade with his personal lawyer riding shotgun. The police came 17 minutes after the crash. My father handled everything. I mean that literally. He stood between me and every conversation, placed his hand briefly on my shoulder once, and spoke in the low, measured voice he used when he was performing calm. The lawyer said the necessary words. Joseph Kowalski went to the hospital in an ambulance, and I watched the red lights disappear around the corner of the street and felt absolutely nothing, which tells you everything about who I was then. My father drove me home. I slept for 11 hours. The next morning, he came into my apartment. He had a key, of course, because the apartment was his. Technically, everything I had was his. And he sat across from me at the kitchen island and folded his hands on the counter and looked at me the way a contractor looks at a failing foundation, with cold, professional assessment, no emotion, just the calculation of what it will cost to fix. Measured, without raising his voice. This is the 4th time, Dean. He was right. There had been a fender bender in Scottsdale 2 years ago, a noise complaint from a Galleria party that required a settlement, a bar fight in New Orleans where someone's nose got broken, and my father's lawyer made that disappear too. 4 times of being caught, many more times of nothing catching. Still measured. The DA is a friend of mine. Your blood alcohol was .12, which is a felony DUI in Texas. The driver's attorney has already called. The man has a cardiac condition. Apparently the impact triggered something. His medical bills are going to be substantial. He paused, adjusted his watch. There are 2 ways this goes. 1, I make it go away again, the way I always make it go away. You pay a fine, you do community service, you go right back to doing exactly what you've been doing. And the next time, someone might die. Another pause, longer. Or 2, you take your punishment. What does that mean? He slid a single piece of paper across the island. It was an address in the East End of Houston, a neighborhood I knew existed the way I knew Siberia existed, which is to say, I'd heard of it. A woman named Dara Kowalski works the evening cleaning shift at my firm's downtown office. She's 24. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in the East End with her father when he's not on the road, which, given current circumstances, he won't be for a while. He looked at me. She's agreed, for a fee I've paid, to let you stay in her spare room for 1 month. You will live on her budget, you'll find work, you'll pay your own way. No credit cards, I've suspended them. No access to your accounts, I've frozen them. You'll have $100 in cash, which will have to last you through the first week until you can earn more. I stared at him. You're joking. The alternative is I step back and let the DA proceed. A felony DUI conviction with injury means you lose your driver's license for 2 years minimum, likely face jail time, and the civil suit from the Kowalski family will cost significantly more than a month of discomfort. He stood up. Your choice. You have until noon. I chose the apartment. Of course, I chose the apartment. I thought, how bad can it be? 1 month. I could do 1 month of anything. I'd done a semester of architecture school before I dropped out. I could handle a month of playing at being poor. I packed a bag, took a rideshare to the East End because my Porsche was an impound, and stood outside a beige 3-story apartment complex with a broken fountain in the courtyard and a hand-lettered sign on the mailbox room that said, "Buzzer's not working. Knock." I knocked. The woman who opened the door was small, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing paint-stained jeans and an oversized Texas State sweatshirt. She had flour on her left forearm, which she noticed and wiped off on her jeans as she looked at me. Her eyes were very dark brown, and they looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostility, not welcome, Something more complicated than either. "You're Dean Voss." "That's me. You must be." "The bathroom's on the left. The spare room has a cot, no frame. Wi-Fi password is on the fridge, but the router cuts out between 11 and midnight. Don't ask me why. House rules. Clean up after yourself, don't touch my drafting table, and don't wake me up before 7. She stepped back to let me in. "Dinner's at 6:30 if you want it. If you don't, there's peanut butter." That was how I met Dara Kowalski. The apartment was small in a way that my Montrose place was not. My bedroom back home, I'd stopped calling it home within a week, I should say, was larger than Dara's entire living area. The spare room had a folding cot, a single window overlooking the parking lot, and a shelf with 3 architecture textbooks and a paperback Stephen King novel that turned out to be Dara's, left there by accident. The walls were thin enough that I could hear everything. The upstairs neighbor's television, the couple on the other side arguing about something in rapid Spanish, and, on the first night, what I was fairly certain was a very large animal somewhere very close. The sound, a sort of low, rumbling displeasure, was coming from under the cot. I turned on my phone flashlight and looked. A cat the size of a small dog stared back at me. Long-haired, gray with darker tabby markings, with amber eyes that contained a degree of personal contempt I had not previously witnessed in any living creature. He was enormous. I later learned he weighed 22 pounds, and his name, I would discover in the morning, was Brutus. Brutus looked at me. I looked at Brutus. He hissed. It was a long, sustained hiss, the kind that communicates not sudden fear, but deliberate, considered opinion. Fantastic. I slept on approximately 11 inches of cot that first night, curled on my side, with Brutus occupying the rest of the mattress in a display of territorial authority that I was in no position to challenge. I lay in the dark listening to the couple through the wall and the upstairs television and the distant sound of a train on the Union Pacific line, and I thought, 30 days. You can do 30 days. I was not thinking about Joseph Kowalski. I should have been, but I wasn't. Not yet. The next morning, Dara made coffee in a Mr. Coffee machine that looked like it had survived the Clinton administration, and she sat at her drafting table by the window, which I was not to touch, and which I understood immediately I was not to approach without invitation. And she worked on something I couldn't see from across the room. The table was covered in trace paper and printed site surveys, and a coffee mug full of pencils and technical pens, and it was the most lived-in surface I'd ever seen. Every inch purposeful, every object placed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing with it. There's oatmeal in the cabinet. The job listings are on the counter. I printed them last night. I looked at the counter. There was a single sheet of paper with 5 listings circled in red pen. Warehouse sorter at a distribution center on Clinton Drive, day laborer posting for a construction crew in the 5th Ward, dishwasher at a diner on Navigation, general labor at a metal fabrication shop, loading dock worker at a cold storage facility near the port. I stood holding the paper and understood, perhaps for the first time, that this was not theater. These are all physical labor jobs. Still not looking up. Yes. I have a background in, now looking up, briefly and without warmth. I know exactly what your background is, Mr. Voss. The listings are on the counter. I took the construction crew posting. It paid $16.50 an hour, cash, starting at 6:30 in the morning, and the foreman's name was Big Ray Thibodeau, who was a large Cajun man from Beaumont who expressed skepticism about my qualifications by looking me up and down once and saying, with a slow drawl, "Boy, Have you ever swung a hammer in your life? I said yes, which was technically true because I'd played around in my father's office once when I was 12. Big Ray looked at me the way Brutus had looked at me, with similar conclusions reached, and then handed me a pair of work gloves and told me to start loading rebar. The first week, I came home every evening with my hands shaking from the unaccustomed effort, my back aching in ways I hadn't known backs could ache, my palms developing blisters that broke and bled and reformed. I ate whatever Dara made. She cooked simply, efficiently, rice and beans and chicken thighs, and sometimes a pot of something with vegetables from the corner market. And I showered, and I fell onto the cot, and Brutus installed himself on my legs, and I was too tired to argue about it. Dara and I didn't talk much those first days. She worked evenings at the cleaning job, leaving around 5:30, getting back around 11. During the overlap hours, we occupied the same small space with careful, deliberate distance. She at her table, me at the kitchen counter with my sore hands wrapped around a mug, watching her work without appearing to watch her work. She drew quickly and with precision, the pencil moving in confident strokes that I recognized from my one aborted semester at the architecture program at Rice. She was good. Not student good, actually good. The kind of good that makes you feel the talent radiating off the paper. One evening, unable to help myself, "What is that? The project?" She considered whether to answer. Finally, without turning, "Mixed-use housing, community center on the ground floor, 12 residential units above. The city has a development grant program. I've been working on a proposal for 8 months. The grant, is it competitive?" Everything worth doing is competitive. I went back to my mug. Brutus jumped onto the counter next to me, sat 4 inches from my face, and stared at me with unblinking judgment. I stared back. We had developed by this point a détente of mutual hostility that was at least consistent. I know, man. I know. It was the end of the first week when I heard the name. I was on lunch break at the construction site, sitting on a cooler with my sandwich, peanut butter, because I'd made a budget mistake on Tuesday and was eating peanut butter for 3 days, when 2 of the other guys were talking. Their names were Marcus and Deshaun, and they were maybe 30, and they talked to me now with the particular warmth of people who have decided you might be all right once they've seen you work without complaining, which is a currency I hadn't known existed. Marcus was saying something about a guy from his church, a trucker who'd gotten hit by some drunk rich kid a couple weeks back in Midtown. I stopped chewing. Old Joe Kowalski, man. His daughter works 2 jobs, and she's still trying to figure out how to cover the cardiac stuff on top of the accident bills. Insurance is garbage. They always get you on something. How's he doing? Stable, I think, but they found something. Some pre-existing valve thing that the accident made worse. He needs a procedure. 60 grand, maybe more. The peanut butter sandwich turned to something unswallowable in my mouth. I set it down on my knee. I sat there for the remaining 8 minutes of lunch break with the Texas sun overhead and the sound of traffic on Clinton Drive. And what I felt was not what I expected to feel. I expected guilt, maybe. What I felt was something worse, a specific, carving shame, the kind that comes when you understand that your carelessness has had geometry, has had shape, has touched people whose names you hadn't known and whose lives had continued in your absence, getting harder. I'd handed a bleeding man $600 through a broken window and thought that was a unit of care. I hadn't thought about who else was in his life. I hadn't thought about a daughter working 2 jobs. I hadn't thought about anything beyond the logistics of making the problem disappear. His daughter, Dara Kowalski. I'd been sleeping in her spare room for a week, eating her rice and beans, arguing silently with her cat, and I had not once, connected the name. That evening I came home and she was at the table, and I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her bent over her drawings, and I understood that she knew. She had known from the beginning. My father had told her who I was, and she had opened her door anyway, and she had made me oatmeal and printed me job listings and had not said a single word about it. I didn't say anything that night. I wasn't ready, and I didn't have the vocabulary, and anything I said would have been wrong. I went to my room, lay down, and Brutus came in and sat on my chest and looked at me with his amber eyes, and for once he didn't hiss. He just sat there, heavy and warm, and I lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling for a long time. There's a woman named Roxanne Petrazak who lives across the hall in apartment 2C. She is 27 years old. She works dispatch for a taxi company from home, and she has opinions about everything that exists within a 3-mile radius of the East End, and several opinions about things considerably farther away. She and Dara have been friends since Dara moved in 4 years ago, which means Roxanne has opinions about me specifically, which she began delivering on day 3 and has not stopped since. She knocked on the door that Saturday while Dara was at the grocery store. I opened it. She looked me up and down in a single comprehensive sweep. "So you're the rich dipshit." Rox Petrazak. "Don't worry, I'm not going to be nice to you right away. It's a policy." She looked around the apartment. "You haven't broken anything yet. That's something, I guess." She spotted Brutus on the couch and pointed at him. "What does he think of you?" "He hates me." "He's a good judge of character. How long before you bolt back to Daddy?" "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at me. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but the slight recalibration of someone who has heard something unexpected. "All right." She sat down on Dara's couch and picked up Brutus, who allowed this. "You want some coffee? I'll make some. Dara's machine is better than mine." Roxanne became, in her specific way, a presence. She appeared most evenings, usually with a bottle of $2 wine and something she'd made, pasta or quesadillas, or once an absolutely extraordinary pot of bigos that she'd gotten from her grandmother's recipe. She had a rotating group of 2 other women from the building. Tammy, who worked night auditing at a hotel and appeared only before her shift started, and B, who was 62 and retired and crocheted at approximately the speed of light while maintaining perfect conversational fluency. Every Sunday they gathered in Dara's living room, or occasionally Rox's, with their yarn and their hooks and their wine, and the crochet club was technically about crocheting, but functionally about everything else. I learned to time my exits and entrances around these gatherings because they were loud and good-humored, and I felt simultaneously drawn to them and aware that I was not quite their audience. I did once get recruited. Rox, holding out a crochet hook. "Sit down, you're learning." "I don't think." B, without looking up from her work. "Sit." I sat. B spent 20 minutes teaching me the basic chain stitch with a patience that suggested she'd taught grandchildren and was therefore immune to adult incompetence. I made approximately 8 inches of extremely uneven chain before I gave up, but Rox photographed it and labeled it Dean's Art and taped it to the refrigerator, where it stayed for the rest of the month. Rox, that Sunday, ostensibly to Dara, but loud enough for me to hear. "Okay, but he sat there for 20 minutes trying to crochet, like a large, confused Labrador. I can't fully hate him." Dara, very quietly. "Rox." I know. I pretended not to have heard. Brutus, who was sitting on the arm of the chair I'd vacated, regarded me from across the room, with what I chose to interpret as slightly less hostility than usual. I need to go back to the thing my father didn't tell me. I found out about it on the 15th day of my month, which is to say 2 weeks in. which is to say, at the exact point where I had stopped performing adjustment and actually begun adjusting. The calluses on my hands had hardened. I'd gotten fast enough at the morning routine, 5:45 alarm, coffee from the Mr. Coffee, peanut butter toast or oatmeal depending on the budget, work boots on, out the door by 6, that it no longer felt like effort. Big Ray had stopped looking at me like a liability and started occasionally asking my opinion on things, which in Big Ray's world was the highest form of respect available. Dara and I had been talking more, not about her father, never about her father, a subject with an invisible perimeter around it that I had not tried to cross, but about architecture, about her project, about the grant proposal, about the city development program and what the judges were looking for and what she thought was wrong with the current design, which she explained with the focused intensity of someone who has thought about one thing for a very long time and is finally being asked about it. One evening, spreading the site plan across the kitchen table because there wasn't room at the drafting table. The problem is the light wells. I have them on the south face, which is technically correct for solar access, but the courtyard ends up in shadow for most of the afternoon, which means the community center, which is supposed to be the heart of the whole thing, is dark and cold in the hours when people actually want to use it. I looked at the plan. I don't know what made me say what I said next. Maybe it was the semester at Rice. Maybe it was years of growing up watching my father build things, of absorbing by osmosis the vocabulary of construction and design. Maybe it was just that I could see it clearly. What if the community center wasn't at grade?
What if you pushed it up half a level, like a raised plinth, and let the light wells angle under it? You'd get afternoon light into the center and still have your courtyard, just with a split-level entry. Dara looked at me. There was a pause. A long pause. Carefully, like she was tasting the idea. The structural load, concrete cantilever, it's not as heavy as it looks on paper. You could detail the supports as an architectural element, exposed concrete fins. It would give the whole thing a different character. Another pause. She looked at the drawing. She looked at me. You know what you're talking about. I dropped out of Rice, architecture program, second year. Why? There were many answers to that question. The true one was, because my father paid my tuition and my apartment and my bar tab, and I never learned that the alternative to effort is collapse, because collapse had always been caught before it landed. I didn't say all of that. I didn't deserve to be there yet. I thought I did, but I didn't. She looked at me a moment longer. Then she pulled the plan closer and picked up her pencil, and she said, "Show me where you'd put the cantilever." We worked until 1 in the morning. Brutus arranged himself on the table between us, partially on the drawings, and had to be relocated 3 times. Dara moved him each time with the automatic affection of long familiarity, and at some point past midnight, he came and sat on my feet under the table and stayed there, and I didn't say anything about it because I didn't want to break whatever was happening in the room. The next morning was when I found out about my father. Rocks knocked at 7, which was early for her, and she had her phone in her hand and an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not the usual sharp amusement, not the performed skepticism. Something tighter. "Do you know a man named Marcus Bellamy?" My stomach moved. "He's a developer, my father's main competitor in the Houston market. Why?" She held out her phone. It was a text thread, not between her and Bellamy, but a screenshot of something she'd gotten from a contact of hers who dispatched for a car service. The text showed a conversation between someone identified as HV, Harlan Voss, and someone identified as MB. The timestamp was 4 days ago.
HV. She'll have the proposal ready before the grant deadline. My son's been working with her. I have eyes on the project. MB. And you want to bring it to me before she submits? HV. If it's as good as I think it is, we take the concept, submit under Bellamy Architecture's name, and you share the contract with Voss Construction when it's awarded. She gets nothing. Nobody knows where the design came from. MB. And the kid? HV. He goes home at the end of the month. He never needs to know. I read it twice. The kitchen was very quiet. The Mr. Coffee was gurgling through its cycle, and the sound was very loud. Rox, watching me. Your father sent you here to get close to her, so he could steal her work. The thing about being Harlan Voss's son is that a part of me had always known he was capable of something like this. That part had been buried under 26 years of comfort and convenience and the willful incuriosity of a person who benefits from not asking questions. Now it surfaced cleanly, like something that had been submerged, finally breaking the waterline. My father didn't believe in rehabilitation. He believed in leverage. He'd seen the project. He'd known Dara Kowalski was talented. He'd arranged the entire month, the supposed punishment, the apartment, the $100, all of it, as a mechanism to get a spy into her home. And the spy was me, his son, who had not asked enough questions to see it. I put the phone down on the counter. I looked at the drafting table, at the site plan we'd revised together until 1 a.m, the cantilever sketched in my handwriting because Dara had handed me the pencil at some point and I'd just taken it. Very quietly, to myself as much as Rox. He's been watching. He said he had eyes. Rox, carefully. There's something else. She scrolled up in the screenshot. 4 days ago is when he sent that. But look at the date on this. She showed me a second image, an email chain. My father to Bellamy, dated the day before I arrived at Dara's apartment. He'd already talked to Bellamy before you got here. He'd already made the deal. The whole thing was set up before you ever knocked on that door. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. The coffee finished brewing. Steam rose from the carafe. Outside, someone's truck engine turned over and caught, and I heard it back out of the parking lot and drive away. Rox, quieter now. She doesn't know. No. Are you going to tell her? I thought about Dara at her drafting table. 8 months of work, the way her pencil moved, the way she'd looked at me last night when I suggested the cantilever, with the specific expression of someone who does not give trust easily and is carefully, incrementally beginning to extend it. The community center with its light wells, her father in a hospital bed with a cardiac valve and $60,000 of medical bills. Yes. Okay. She picked up her phone. And then what? That was the question I didn't have an answer to yet, but I was already thinking about Marcus Bellamy and about the fact that my father was not the only one in Houston who wanted to build things. I told Dara that evening. She'd come back from an afternoon at the library. She used the library's large format printer for her drawings because the paper rolls were expensive. And she was carrying a tube of rolled trace paper and her usual bag, and she looked tired in the particular way she always looked tired, which was not defeated tired, but running on reserves tired, which is different. She set everything down on the table and turned to find me sitting on the couch with the expression of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation and knows none of the rehearsals have prepared him. Before I could start, "What happened?" I told her. All of it. The texts, the email, my father's arrangement with Bellamy, the eyes on the project, what her work was worth to him, and how he'd intended to take it. I told her without softening any of it, because she deserved the unedited version, and I watched her face as I talked. She stood very still. That was what I noticed. She didn't move, didn't sit, didn't pace. She stood in the middle of her living room with her hands at her sides and her face composed into a stillness that was clearly its own kind of effort. The only movement was Brutus, who jumped down from the couch and went to stand near her feet, pressing his large body against her ankles. When I finished, there was a silence that went on for a full minute. Quietly, finally. "How long have you known?" "Since this morning. Rox showed me." Another pause. "Did you know before today? Any of it?" I looked at her. "No. I didn't know he'd planned it. I didn't know your name when I got here. I didn't know your father was—" I stopped. "I didn't make the connection until the second week. On the job site, I heard your father's name, and then I knew, and I didn't know how to—" "You sat here for a week after knowing." "Yes." The silence returned. Brutus headbutted her ankle. She reached down and picked him up, automatically, the way people reach for things they trust. "You need to go." "I know, but I want to." I stopped again, restarted. "The project. He doesn't have it yet. Bellamy doesn't have it. I saw the messages. They're waiting for you to finish it, which means you still have it. And I know someone who can help you get it in front of the right people before my father can do anything." She looked at me now. "Why would you do that?" It was a fair question. The honest answer was layered in ways I hadn't fully articulated, even to myself. Because I owed her father $60,000 worth of shame that no amount of cash could actually redeem. Because I'd spent 2 weeks in this apartment, eating her food and sleeping in her spare room, and watching her work towards something real, the most real thing I'd ever been near, and the thought of my father erasing it made something in my chest feel like a structural failure, like a wall bearing weight it was never designed to carry, suddenly deciding it's had enough. Because she'd opened her door, knowing who I was, and she'd made me oatmeal anyway. Because it's your work, and because I can actually help. She stood there holding Brutus, who was watching me with his amber eyes, and she was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had changed, still careful, still guarded, but with a hairline fracture in the guardedness. "What do you mean, someone who can help you?" What I meant was Bellamy himself. I know how that sounds. Let me explain. I had met Marcus Bellamy twice at industry events, back when I was attending them as Harlan Voss's son, which is a very different thing from attending them as anything else. He was a smart man with a competitive streak and a very strong dislike of my father. A dislike that was professional and personal and well documented over 2 decades of Houston development politics. The texts Rox had shown me were not proof of a finished deal. They were proof of a negotiation that was still in progress. Bellamy hadn't agreed to take the stolen project yet. He was considering it, which meant he was also potentially available to be offered something better. Dara looked at me like I had suggested jumping off a bridge. "You want to take my project to your father's competitor? The man your father is trying to cut a deal with? I want to take your project to the only person in Houston with both the motive to screw over Harlan Voss and the resources to actually submit a competitive grant application with you as the lead architect. You keep the design credit, you get the job, Bellamy gets the construction contract, and the satisfaction of beating my father with my father's own son's help." A pause. "That's insane." "It's the only play." "What does he get out of it? Why would he take a meeting with you?" Because I'm the one thing my father underestimated. He thought I'd do what I always do, not pay attention, not ask questions, drift through the month and come home knowing nothing. He didn't count on me actually looking at your work and understanding what it is. I met her eyes. And because I'm going to offer Bellamy something my father can't, the original documentation, the design process, your sketches, your site surveys, your construction notes, everything that proves authorship, everything that makes it impossible for anyone to claim this is their work. If my father had stolen it, he'd have had a design with no paper trail. I'm offering Bellamy a collaboration with a full paper trail. That's legally safer, competitively stronger, and frankly, more attractive. She looked at me for a long time. You worked all that out today? I've been sitting on the couch for 4 hours. Something moved across her face. I still wasn't sure what to call it. Not trust, not yet, but something adjacent to it, something beginning to be possible. Brutus, from her arms, suddenly and loudly, "Meow!" We both looked at him. He stared back with his amber eyes and then, with great deliberation, climbed out of Dara's arms and walked across the back of the couch to where I was sitting and installed himself on my lap. He began to purr. It was a deep, rattling, improbable purr, like a small engine finding its idol. Dara stared at him. He doesn't do that. Me, very carefully not moving. I'm aware. Dara, slowly, as if making a decision. All right. She sat down on the other end of the couch. Tell me how you get the meeting. I called Marcus Bellamy's personal cell at 8:30 the next morning. I had the number from my father's contact list, which I'd photographed on a visit to his office 2 years ago for reasons I no longer remembered. Bellamy picked up on the third ring. Who is this? Dean Voss. Before you hang up, I know about the conversation you had with my father about the grant project. I know he offered to bring you the design. I'm calling to offer you something better. A pause. Then, I'm listening. The meeting was 3 days later. Bellamy's office was in the Galleria area, on the 14th floor of a glass tower, and it looked like every architecture firm office I'd ever been in. Expensive furniture, framed renderings, a view of the freeway and the distant skyline. Bellamy himself was 60, trim, with silver hair and the compressed attention of a man who did not waste time on things that weren't worth his time. Dara wore a white button-down and her good jeans and carried a portfolio tube and her laptop. She'd been up until 2 the night before finalizing the presentation, and she had the particular focus of someone who has been preparing for this for 8 months and knows that this is what everything has been for. I sat in the chair next to her and introduced nobody, because they already knew who they were. Dara presented for 45 minutes. I watched Bellamy watch her, and I watched his face do the thing that my father's face did when he recognized a good deal. The subtle, involuntary alignment of attention. The way a man looks when he stops performing consideration and begins actually doing it. She walked him through the site, the community center, the light wells, the cantilever, the raised plinth. She drafted it properly now, with structural calculations, with material specifications, with a rendering that showed the afternoon light angling through the concrete fins and pooling in the center space in a way that looked like something someone would photograph for a magazine. When she was done, Bellamy looked at the rendering for a long time without speaking. Finally, to me, "You said you have documentation of authorship." Me. Everything. Dated process files going back 8 months. Physical sketches, site survey photographs. Her professor at Texas State can attest to the methodology. It's airtight. Bellamy, still looking at the rendering. And your father. Me. If he contacts you again, you have a choice about what to tell him. My preference is that you don't tell him anything until after the grant submission, but I'm not going to make your business decisions for you. Bellamy, finally, to Dara directly. The cantilever detail, the concrete fins, that was in the original design? Dara glanced at me very briefly, to Bellamy evenly. It was developed collaboratively in the final week. The design is mine. The structural concept was a joint development.
You suggested the cantilever.
I did. The slight shift in his expression that might have been the beginning of something like respect. Your father told me you dropped out of architecture school. I did. Why? I thought about sitting on Dara's couch for 4 hours. I thought about Big Ray and the rebar and the calluses on my hands. I thought about a man's face through a shattered car window, tired and unsurprised. I wasn't ready. Bellamy looked at me for a moment. Then he looked back at the rendering. He drummed his fingers once on the desk. You get architect of record, full credit, your name on the submission. Bellamy Architecture provides the professional license and submission infrastructure. Voss Construction is not involved in any capacity. He named a number, the architectural fee if the grant was awarded. It was $52,000. The room was very quiet. I heard the building's HVAC system. I heard the distant sound of traffic 14 floors below. Yes. The grant submission went in on the Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks from the day I'd arrived at Dara's apartment. By then, I had 12 days left on my month. I had also made $412 in 2 weeks of labor beyond my first paycheck, which I kept in an envelope in the pocket of my work jacket because there was no other place for it. Rox threw what she called a submission party, which consisted of her and Bea and Tammy in Dara's living room with a bottle of actual champagne. Rox had expensed it somehow, I didn't ask, and their yarn and a playlist of 90s pop that Tammy insisted on, and Brutus moving from lap to lap with the benevolent authority of a small emperor. I sat in the kitchen on the grounds that it was their party and I was adjacent to it at best, and Rox brought me a glass of champagne and set it down in front of me without comment.
You know, I had like 6 plans for how to deal with you when you got here.
Yeah? First plan was to tell everyone in the building you were a cop. Second plan was to give Brutus something that makes him extra aggressive. Third plan was, please stop. You're marginally less of a disaster than I anticipated. That's a compliment coming from me. I drank my champagne. Across the room, Dara was laughing at something Bea had said, and the laugh was sudden and unguarded in a way her face usually wasn't, and the room looked warm in the way that rooms look when they contain people who actually know each other. And I felt something that I didn't have a clean name for. That night, after everyone had gone home and Dara was washing the glasses and I was drying them, because that was what you did, the silence between us had changed character. It was not the careful, maintained distance of the first 2 weeks. It was something else, the specific quiet of 2 people who have been through a thing together and are standing on the other side of it, and neither one has decided yet what that means. You have 12 days left. Yes. What are you going to do? After. I thought about my father's escalade, and his lawyer, and his phone calls that made things go away. I thought about the engraving on the tape measure in my jacket pocket. Build something real. I thought about the cantilever sketched in my handwriting on Dara's site plan. I don't know yet, but not what I was doing before. She handed me another glass without turning. You're different than when you got here. Is that a question or an observation? Observation. I dried the glass and set it on the rack and thought about how to say the thing I'd been circling for days. The thing that felt true in a way very few things in my life had felt true. I looked at your project and I understood it, not just technically. I understood what you were trying to do for that neighborhood, for those people, and it felt... I stopped. It felt like something that mattered, and I haven't spent a lot of time around things that actually mattered. The water kept running. The dish soap made small bubbles that caught the light. Damn. I looked at her. She was almost smiling. What? I don't swear. You made me swear. She turned off the water. Go to bed, Dean. I went to bed. Brutus was already there, occupying 60% of the cot, and for once I was grateful for the weight of him. The call from my father came on day 26, 4 days before my month was up. He'd found out about Bellamy. I didn't know how. My father always found things out. It was one of the things he was actually exceptional at. But he knew about the meeting, knew about the submission, and he called my cell at 6 a.m. while I was lacing up my work boots. You went to Bellamy. Yes. You took the Kowalski Girls project to Marcus Bellamy, my competition. I helped her submit her own work to a grant program that it's qualified for. That's what happened. You have any idea what you just did? I had an arrangement. I know about the arrangement. I know about the texts. I know about all of it, Dad. Silence. Longer than I expected. My father was very good at silences. He deployed them strategically, let them pressure the other person into filling the void. I didn't fill it. Come home, Dean. The month is nearly up. We'll talk. I have 4 more days of work. I'll finish them. Dean, I'll be in touch. I ended the call. I sat for a moment on the edge of the cot with my boots half laced. Brutus was watching me from the pillow. He blinked slowly. Yeah, I know. I finished lacing my boots and went to work. The grant results came 3 weeks after I'd officially left the apartment. I was living in a rented room in a house in the 3rd Ward, sharing a kitchen with 4 other people, working for Big Ray full-time at a pay rate we'd negotiated up to $19 an hour after he'd seen me handle a situation with a subcontractor that required some knowledge of construction contracts. I'd also started picking up drafting work, side work, freelance, small renovation projects that local contractors needed permit drawings for. I had a second-hand drafting board in my room and a set of pencils and a copy of the building code I'd bought used from an engineering student at the University of Houston. Dara called me on a Thursday afternoon. Her voice was different, lighter. The guarded quality briefly dissolved. We got it! I sat on the edge of my drafting board. Outside, the 3rd Ward afternoon was happening. Traffic, kids, a lawnmower somewhere, the specific dense sound of a neighborhood being itself. How much? Full award! $420,000 for the development. My architect's fee is $62,000. The number sat there. $62,000. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard on a construction site lunch break. 2 men talking about a trucker and a hospital bill and a valve that needed fixing. Dara? Yes? I need to talk to you about something. In person, if that's okay. We met at a coffee shop on Navigation. She was there before me, with her laptop and a coffee, and she looked genuinely happy was perhaps too large a claim, but something adjacent. The satisfaction of someone who has built something and watched it stand up. It suited her. I sat down and put an envelope on the table between us. She looked at it. What is this? $48,000. It's what I've saved in the past month and a half, plus what I could pull together from selling some things. I paused. Some watches, a piece of jewelry my father gave me. Things that were his, essentially, not mine. I looked at the envelope. It's not $60,000, I know that. But with your grant fee and my contribution, your father can have the surgery. The coffee shop made its noises around us. Someone behind the counter was steaming milk. A conversation was happening at the next table about someone's wedding. Dara looked at the envelope for a long time without speaking. When she looked up, her eyes were bright, and she was very clearly not going to cry, which I understood was a form of determination. Dean, I drove a car into your father. I handed him money through a window like it was a transaction, and then I spent a month in your apartment not even knowing who he was. I stopped. This doesn't fix that. I know it doesn't fix that, but it's what I can actually do. She was quiet for a moment. Then, he knows who you are. I told him, after Bellamy. A pause. He said, she stopped, started again. He said that what a man does when he's caught matters more than the catching. I looked at the table. How is he? Stable. The doctors say if we move within the next 6 weeks, she nodded at the envelope. This is the 6 weeks. I nodded. Outside, a truck pulled into a parking spot. Big, commercial, with the particular rattle of a diesel engine. And for a fraction of a second, I felt the sound of the crash in my body, the way certain sounds do that to you. And then it passed. I'd like to meet him, when he's ready, if that's okay. I'll ask him. We sat there for a while with our coffees. It wasn't uncomfortable, the silence. It was the silence of people who have said the necessary things and are resting in the aftermath. Finally, Dara. Bellamy wants me to start on the construction documentation next month. He said, she hesitated, he asked if I had a structural collaborator. I looked at her, carefully, not wanting to assume. Did you say anything? Her, with the ghost of the almost smile I'd first seen in her kitchen. I said I might know someone. My father called once more, 2 weeks after the grant announcement. He'd seen it in the Houston Chronicle. Bellamy Architecture awarded City Development Grant, lead architect Dara Kowalski of the East End Community Housing Project. A photograph of the rendering, the cantilever and the concrete fins and the courtyard with its afternoon light. I picked up. Harlan, after a pause, in a voice I hadn't heard him use before, not controlled, not performing, something stripped back. I saw the project. Me, waiting. It's good, Dean. It's actually... Another pause. It's the kind of building that makes a neighborhood. Me. I know. Him, carefully. You're not coming back. It wasn't really a question. Me. Not to what was there before, no. A long silence. I heard his office in the background, the hum of the Voss construction building, the familiar sounds of a place I'd spent my whole life in without ever building anything. Him, finally, very quietly. Build something real. I wasn't sure if it was a command or a memory or something he was saying to himself. Maybe all three. Me. I'm working on it. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in February, I drove a rented truck to a used vehicle lot on the South Loop and bought a 2018 Ford F250 with 60,000 miles on it. I paid cash, or rather, I paid with a cashier's check from my account, which had in it the remaining money from the watches and the jewelry and 6 weeks of freelance drafting work. The truck had a small dent in the rear panel that the dealer offered to fix. I said to leave it. Joseph Kowalski's address I got from Dara. He lived in a small house in Channelview, east of Houston, in a neighborhood of similar small houses, with boats in the driveways and vegetable gardens in the front yards. He answered the door in a flannel shirt and jeans, moving slowly, but on his feet. The surgery had gone well, all things considered, and he was 3 weeks into recovery. He was a stocky man with a gray mustache and hands that looked like they'd spent 30 years holding a steering wheel, which they had. He looked at me with his front door open and the February light behind me, and his face did not do anything dramatic. It just looked at me with those same tired, assessing eyes I remembered from a car window at night. "You're the boy." "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment. Behind him, somewhere in the house, a television was on. "My daughter tells me you've been working." "Yes, sir." He stepped out onto the small front porch and looked at the truck in his driveway. "That for me?" "Yes, sir. The keys are in it." He looked at the truck for a long time. He walked down the 2 porch steps with the careful deliberateness of someone still relearning how much he can trust his body, and he walked around the truck once, running his hand along the side panel, and stopped at the rear where the dent was. "You left this?" "Yes, sir." He stood there. The February air was cold and sharp, the kind of Houston cold that comes in off the Gulf and doesn't play around. "Ah, hell." He said it quietly, not angry, just the 2 words in the voice of a man who has decided something. "Come inside. Dara's here." I hadn't known she was there. I followed him up the porch steps and into the house, which smelled like coffee and something baking and the specific warmth of a home that has been lived in for a long time. Dara was in the kitchen at the table with her laptop and what appeared to be construction documents spread in front of her, and she looked up when I came in. For a moment, she just looked at me. Then she moved her laptop slightly to make room. "Sit down. I want to show you the structural drawings. There's an issue with the connection detail at the cantilever." I sat down. Joe Kowalski went to the coffee pot and poured 3 cups without asking whether I wanted one, which meant I was getting one. And he set them on the table and then lowered himself into his chair with the careful economy of movement of a man respecting his recovery. I looked at the structural drawing Dara was pointing to. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the tape measure, old brass-edged, my father's handwriting on the back. I set it on the table between us, not for any practical reason, just because it felt right to have it there. Build something real. I looked at the connection detail. I looked at the pencil Dara was holding out to me. "Okay, here's what I think we do with the connection." The coffee was hot and strong, and Joe Kowalski drank his in silence and watched his daughter and a boy who had damaged his life lean over a drawing together with the focused attention of people who are building something. And outside the small Channelview house, the February morning continued being itself, cold and bright and entirely indifferent to the fact that something in it had quietly, without announcement, been repaired. The tape measure stayed on that table for the rest of the morning. When I left, I forgot to pick it up. I went back for it 2 days later. By then, it had been moved to the windowsill, where Dara had put it next to a mug full of pencils, and it looked like it belonged there. I left it.